All right, so this is the place we're going to talk about right here across the street. This big gray mansion right here. Okay, again, according to legend, this is the most haunted building in the entire city of New Orleans. It's saying a lot. There's a lot of very spooky stuff around here, of course. But we're going to get into that here in a second. You're going to see why. The story about this place is really, really awful. I'm actually going to take you down the street a little bit to get into the story about it. Where it's a little bit quieter down there. It actually gets very noisy over here with this intersection. So I'll take you down there. It's a little more conducive to the story here in a second. But before we go down there, I want to point out just a few things about the layout of the house from right here, just so you guys can see what we're talking about. And also, if you want to take pictures of this building, this is going to be a much better picture spot right here than we're going to be in a minute. So feel free to snap some photos of it if you want to. So anyway, guys, we're talking about everything in gray across the street, from the corner right here, all the way down to that black garage door. Okay, that entire gray edifice is called the Lalaurie Mansion, or the Lalaurie House. The bigger part of the house right here on the corner across the street, this is what used to be the main living quarters up here. So for example, up there on the second floor, we see those open shutters. That used to be like bedrooms and dining rooms and stuff like that. Down here on the ground level, right across the street, you see these 6 French doors here. Back in the 1830s, when this story takes place, if you would have walked through those doors right there, you would have emerged into a giant ballroom. Okay, so imagine a big party space. It used to take up most of the lower part of that floor there. Also, as we walk by over here, make sure you look between the 2 sections of the house, right there in the middle. Up through there, you can see into the inner courtyard, and you can see how deep the place goes in the block here, and how kind of labyrinthine it is on the inside. It gives you a better sense of scale for the building. And then finally, guys, the shorter part of the building down there, where you can see the window unit upstairs and the black garage door downstairs. That's what used to be the slaves' quarters. And of particular interest to the story is the lower part of the slaves' quarters, where the garage is right now. That's what used to be the kitchen, and that's where a lot of the action of the story takes place, is right there in that kitchen. Okay, so have a look at that stuff as you go by. I'll tell you what, I'm actually going to take you right across the street over here. We'll go look at it up close. Okay, so follow me this way, we'll get into it. Very good. So this is where we're going to get into the sort of the dark side of the board here. The first part of this has been like the rainbows and sunshine.
Is that something on the lens?
No, because it's in different spots.
Really horrible stuff here that, for better or worse, the city's kind of well known for. And the story about this house, it basically takes us back to 1831. Okay, so 1831, that giant gray mansion over there we were just looking at. At that time, that place was occupied as a single family residence, okay, by Delphine and Louis Lalaurie. Now the Lalauries, their whole story is wild. They were both from wealthy families. By the time of this story, Delphine Lalaurie, she was an independently wealthy woman. Her first 2 husbands had actually died under mysterious circumstances, and she had inherited most of their wealth, which was, by the way, really rare for a woman in the 1800s to pull that off. But she managed that twice, so she's a clever lady, and also probably a murderer. But anyway, her third husband at the time of this story was this other guy called Louis Lalaurie, and Louis was also pretty well off. Okay, he came from a wealthy family too, and he was a doctor. He was kind of like this up-and-coming young physician. He was 23 years old when they got married. He hadn't really made his fortune yet, but he's still pretty wealthy compared to most people. But compared to Delphine, he was, he was small potatoes. He didn't have nearly as much money as she did. But still, the two of them, when they got together, with their powers combined, they were easily sort of the financial power couple here of 1830s New Orleans. So you can think of them back then as being sort of like the Bill and Melinda Gates of this region during this time, or better yet, the Jay-Z and Beyonce of this region during this time. That's actually a better comparison, because they were really, really socially popular. When they showed up here, they were like the it couple in town. Everybody loved going over to their house. They became known and kind of famous throughout this region for their hospitality, which was extravagant. Up to twice a week sometimes, they would have these really, really extreme kind of dinner parties over their house. They'd have all the New Orleanian socialites over there in the big ballroom I was pointing out, and they would have just like the best of everything. The best food, the best wine, best music, best of all that. And that's saying a whole lot. Okay, this is not like before. We were talking about before, like the colonial era of the city, when things are a little bit more rough and tumble and stuff around here. By now, it's a different scene entirely. You got to reset your mental image. Okay, so by now we're talking about the 1830s. Okay, so you got steamboats out on the river. Right, there are slaves working on the plantations lining the river. So that's going from here all the way up past Baton Rouge, all the way up to like Natchez, Mississippi. The entire river over that stretch is completely lined with plantations on both sides. During that time, it was like a factory. And the people who were benefiting from that whole system back then, it was an extremely wealthy, extremely decadent time here in New Orleans. There's so much money flowing up and down the river back then. Okay, my point is, these are very, very fancy parties over there, world class parties. This is the sort of thing where if you get the invite with the mail from Lalaurie, that means you made it. You're at the top of the heap. So everybody loves going over there. Everybody wants to be seen at these parties, and that went on for a little while. They're very popular. But eventually things over there got weird. Otherwise we probably would be staying out here tonight. But eventually what happened is that rumors started to spread throughout the city that the Lalauries were mistreating their slaves in various ways. And you have to understand that during this period of Louisiana history here, Wander was called Code Noir. Code Noir is French for black code. And essentially what that was a series of laws that outlined all the different elements of life in Louisiana during this time. This is the same series of laws, for example, that made us Catholic that I was telling you about before. but also made it so that it also spelled out exactly how slave owners here could and could not treat their slaves. And it was different than other slave codes in the South during the same period. Okay, it was different here, remember, because we were founded by the French in Louisiana, not by the English like most of the rest of the country. We have different fundamental common law here. And as a result of that, there's some kind of quirks in slave laws here which are worth noting, especially for this story. So one of the important things you got to understand is there are certain punishments here. They were illegal to be given to slaves. They were not illegal elsewhere in the South. That's important for this story. Also more important just broadly about Côte Noire is that slaves were allowed to work on Sundays. They could basically take on a second job or kind of business interest, if you can imagine that, and over time they could earn their own money that way. And eventually they could save up their money and they could use that to purchase their freedom. It's very, very important in Louisiana history. You literally don't get New Orleans, as we know, without Côte Noire, but you have to be sort of careful about that. I've heard people out here over the years say really bizarre stuff about this. They'll say, oh, I get it, slaves had it so much better here in Louisiana than they had it elsewhere in the South and stuff like that. That's bonkers. It's not true. It's just like today, just because there's a law in the books, doesn't mean everybody follows that law. And back then it was, no better. In fact, it was a lot worse back then. So you got to understand that was the social atmosphere during this time. So, as these rumors are going around about the Lalauries, a lot of the stuff that they're being accused of in those rumors, it wouldn't have just been like unbecoming. A lot of it would have been straight up illegal. Okay, but the other thing you got to realize about that is that nobody did anything about it. Everybody kind of swept it under the rug. Nobody wanted to be the ones to confront the Lalauries about all this stuff and lose their invites to the next big party and lose their social standing and stuff. So they go on doing their thing for a while. They're throwing their parties. Everybody's doing over there. Everybody's whispering. But nobody does anything. So they go on doing the thing. But eventually got to the point over there where it couldn't be ignored anymore. Okay, so one night there was a young slave girl here by the name of Leah. Leah's about 10 years old. She's upstairs on the second floor of the house, up there where those shutters are tonight. You can see those plants up there. And on that night, she's up there in one of the bedrooms. So you can imagine a big, fancy, bedroom up there. She's intending to have Delphine, probably in the way she had done many nights before that. She's up there brushing Delphine's hair, getting ready for bed. On this particular night, though, she ran across a knot in Delphine's hair. And she's not a trained hairdresser by any means. She's a little girl. Instead of seizing it out gently like you might, she tore right through it with her arm. And then enraged Delphine. So she jumped up out of her seat up there on the second floor. She grabbed a riding crop, a small whip, and she started to slash the little girl. And she chased her out in the hallway up there on the second floor. Eventually, she chased her all the way out to the gallery up there. You can see the plant box up there tonight. Now again, if you're looking up there the night this is going on, you're not seeing pretty flower boxes up there and all that stuff. You're seeing like the wealthiest, most influential woman in the entire region. She's chasing a little girl across her gallery. She's beating her with a riding crop. She's shouting at her at the top of her lungs. And the whole time she's doing that, she had nothing on up there but her nightgown. Okay, so this is scandalous on like every level. It turns out that the neighbors across the street over here heard this racket outside. And they came outside and they started to watch. You can imagine there. The neighbors were already there. You guys can see up on the sidewalk. So anyway, they come out and they start watching. And what happened next, unfortunately, is not entirely clear. Okay, either the neighbors didn't see it that clearly, or probably more likely the way is they probably saw it perfectly well. But again, they were too afraid to report what they saw. Again, Lalaurie wealth and influence and all that. But basically, they say that the little girl Leah went over the gallery railing there, even in the courtyard. We just passed by there. Now, it's not clear that night whether she jumped over on purpose to escape from Delphine getting beat and stuff, whether she tumbled over accidentally, she was running, or possibly still with the Delphine shoved her or threw her over. But regardless, the neighbors across the street over there, they reported hearing a short, sharp scream followed by a sickening crack as this girl's body hit the cobblestones back there, and that was enough for them. Right? So they contacted the authorities, and the police showed up a little while later. They went inside the courtyard over there to check it out. It turns out the fire, they went inside there, and sure enough, this young slave girl, Leah, she had fallen to her death right there in the courtyard. She had broken her neck in that fall. And to make matters a lot worse than that, they found that Delphine Lalaurie had actually forced this girl's own mother to bury her right there in a shallow grave inside the courtyard right there. Okay, she's trying to cover it up real quick. Well, fortunately, it didn't work. They're caught right from the get-go. So now the law kicks into place. Right now, under Côte Noire, is stipulated if you're found guilty of this sort of cruelty to your slaves back then, the specific offense here was called barbarism. Okay, if you're found guilty of barbarism, first of all, you'd be given a pretty expensive fine. On top of that, you'd have your slaves removed from your household, and they'd be auctioned off for the benefit of the state. And again, the idea behind that, I think, is it's supposed to be a financial penalty to these slave owners. But, I guess it would have been for some people, but the Lalauries were kind of above it. They had friends, they had contacts, they had influence and stuff all throughout the region. So long story short, it's kind of complicated, but basically what ended up happening is they auctioned off their slaves to those people they knew, and a little while later, when the heat from all this died down, some of those same people sent their slaves right back to them in secret. And I say secret in quotes because it's kind of an open secret. A lot of folks knew about this. So basically, the Lalauries, they more or less got away with the murder or the negligent death or whatever you want to call it of this little girl on their property with nothing more really than a menial fine, a little bit of a kind of a slap on the wrist. Okay, but that did confirm the rumors, right? So now everybody in town knows for sure the Lalauries are mistreating their slaves. That I wouldn't quite say it was a scandal back then, but word got around, and I think it says a tremendous amount about how society worked back then when I tell you that that did not stop people from showing up to their fancy parties over there. So we fast forward a little bit, and eventually we come to April 10th, 1834. Okay, this is a very, very infamous night here in New Orleans. So the Lawleries are back here that night, and they're hosting their biggest, most extravagant party yet. Okay, so according to a lot of the guests out here that night, there were like 200 or 300 people out here in the ballroom, out in the street. Just this giant party. Okay, best, signature older hospitality, all that stuff. Best food, best wine. Everybody's drinking, they're dancing, having a great time. Okay, it's going very well. Until eventually, a couple hours into the party, someone out here in the street shouts out fire, fire. There are flames and smoke shooting out from the kitchen over there. And I remember the kitchen back then is where the black garage door is today, right there by that street light. So you can imagine there's smoke pouring out of there. And it turns out the Lawleries, they didn't panic. This is the 1830s. Kitchen fires were actually really common back then. So they simply gathered up their guests. They escorted everybody out here on the street, and they continued to serve them wine and hors d'oeuvres and all that, keep the party going. And eventually, the fire brigade shows up, and they went inside the kitchen over there. And it turns out the fire wasn't that bad at all. They put it out very quickly, and they doused it with just a few buckets of water. But when they did that, when they doused the fire, they found something a lot worse inside the kitchen there. They found a 70-year-old slave woman, and this woman in there had been chained to the stove by her ankle, and she had nothing but a dirty cot to sleep on and a small barrel to go to the bathroom in. And it looked like she'd been locked there for a couple days. And these firemen, they questioned her. And they said, "Good Lord, what's happening here? You know, why are you locked in the stove?" And they let her go. And unfortunately, they discovered right off the bat that this lady had not been educated in the local languages. Okay, now you got to think this through. During this time, this is technically an American city. Okay, we're still mostly speaking French and Spanish in New Orleans. And again, under Code Noir, you're supposed to teach your slaves the local languages so they can, you know, they have a shot at making it in the world. But this lady in there, she can't speak Spanish at all. She can barely speak French. And in her broken French, she finally managed to get across to these firemen. She says, "I set this fire on purpose. I set this fire on purpose because I'd rather die here tonight in a fire than spend one more night in this house knowing what the deal is here." So she's trying to point out something going on directly above them over there. Okay, and these firemen, they can barely understand this lady. Right, but they know something ain't right. This is real fishy, you know. So they went upstairs under the pretense of searching for embers or places where the fire may have spread to that night. And as they're doing that, they noticed Louis and Delphine out here in the street. They're starting to look pretty nervous. They're casting glances back towards the house. They're trying to keep an eye on these firemen, but you know they're distracted. They got all their guests out here. They're trying to maintain appearances and all that. So while they're doing that, the firemen explore the house, and it didn't take them very long in there at all to find some really, really messed up stuff. Okay, they end up going to the second floor of the slave quarters. Again, if you start with the black garage door today, all right, you go one up on the gallery over there, and you go all the way to the back of the house. So that way, that's essentially what those guys did up that night. Okay, when these guys get back to these firemen, they found themselves in this dark hallway at the back of the house. And at the end of this hallway, they find a heavy wooden door back there, and it's been barred shut. Again, very unusual. It's not the sort of stuff you see in a socialite mansion like this. So these guys are really curious about that, especially given what they heard downstairs. So they go back there and they pop this door open. And when they do that, they immediately regretted that decision. Okay, the stench, the smell, it came pouring out from behind this door up there. That night it was enough to literally send these guys up there reeling and gagging and getting sick in the hallways of the house by their own account. And you have to kind of think that through for a second. The guys who we get that account from, that's not like you and I talking about this being nasty. That's not like a Yelp review. You know, those are 1830s firemen we're talking about. These guys have been around here for real house fires professionally. They've been here for sewage in the streets every day like we talked about. You know, yellow fever outbreaks back then. Miles and miles. These guys have lived through all that stuff hands on. Okay, and this is still enough over here in this house to get them sick in the hallways we'll talk about later. So it's very, very intense. And after some doing, these firemen up there, they gathered up their courage, they took up lanterns, and this will be my lantern, and went back into this chamber up there to see what's going on. Now remember, this taking place at night, right? These guys are up there in the attic. It's more or less, you know, totally dark. They had nothing but lanterns to see with. So as they go into this chamber up there, the first thing they saw when they went inside was to their left. There was a male African slave, and he had been chained to the wall in this chamber with his hands behind his head. Okay, it's very clear that this guy was dead. He'd been hanging there limp for some time. Upon closer inspection with their lanterns, they see not only is this guy dead, he's been brutally tortured. He was mutilated, almost beyond recognition, and he'd had bizarre medical experiments performed all over his body, head to toe. And it actually gets worse. They continue their search for this chamber up there that night, and in that area, that small room, they basically ended up finding 7 total victims that night. All of them were slaves. All of them were in different states of torture and mutilation and dismemberment and the same bizarre medical experimentation. Of course, that begs the question, why? Why does the wealthiest couple in town, the most powerful socialites around here back then, why do they have this, you know, this torture chamber in the middle of their big fancy mansion? And really, guys, one of the weird things about this story is that there's not many answers. Not really any, we don't really know conclusively who was responsible for this. Now, there are many different theories. Okay, obviously, the most common theory around here, if you just ask people on the streets, over the years, most people say that Delphine Lalaurie was the one responsible for this. They say she was one of the United States' first female serial killers, and that she was up there torturing those people for her own sadistic reasons. And that could be true. I'm not saying that's wrong. You know, first of all, if you look into her background, she might have been a serial killer. Okay. Second of all, if you're going to be a serial killer in the early United States, setting up shop here in the slave port would have been very convenient. Okay. Back then, a lot of people don't know. Back then, there's a big black market around here for unregistered slaves. Right? Those are slaves who have been smuggled into the city here illegally by pirates and stuff. Okay, same guys hanging out with Lafitte's back there. They were bad dudes. And those people being smuggled in, they didn't have any registration with the state. Okay, basically anonymous people. So Delphine or someone like her could go out and buy them on the black market, bring them back to her house, do whatever she's going to do, and there'd be no record of that. Okay, so that's possible. But let's not forget about her husband. You got to remember Louis. You know, he's a fair to middle and successful physician. Someone like him would have had a lot to gain from research or whatever he did on these poor victims up there. So, you know, it's certainly possible he was doing it. But again, at the end of the day, we don't really know who to blame. And the reason we don't know is because of what happened next. It actually gets a little bit crazier. Okay, so imagine this. These firemen, they're up there in the attic, and they just discovered these victims. And I think to put it mildly, those guys up there, they're pretty shocked. You know, everybody in town knew the Lawlers were kind of shady and stuff. They had a reputation by this point, but I don't think anybody knows anything like this. So these guys freak out. And they said, oh my God, we got to tell people. You know, it turns out, you know, they got a good chance to do that right now. This is pre-Twitter. You know, back then, if you wanted to sell people, you got to do it more or less face-to-face or the newspaper or something. You know? So they got basically who's who in New Orleans society out here in the street. All these party goers, all these, you know, friends and acquaintances, Lawleries. They're out here, they're having a good time. They're pretty much oblivious as to what's going on inside the house. And so the firemen that night decided to change that. So get this, they gathered the victims from the chamber up there in the attic, and they literally paraded them right out here in front of the party guests. All right, you can imagine being a guest at this party, right? Very eventful night. Lawlery house party, super fancy, right? You got your best clothes, custom tailored for tonight, like weeks in advance. You got your fancy perfume from Europe, you know, you smell great. Your eyebrows are on fleek for sure, you're in there. You're in the ballroom, you're drinking, you're dancing, you know, you're having a great time, you're flirting with somebody. And then, good Lord, the house is on fire. And you're thinking, dang, this is the best part of all time. You know, here I am. They gather out in the street, the party keeps going for a while, the house on fire, that's usually a good sign. And a little while later, though, it turns ugly. You know, here come the firemen from the house, and they're not looking happy and triumphant and all that for putting the fire out. They're looking shocked and horrified. They just got sick, and they got this parade of horribly mutilated people on stretchers behind them out here. So suffice to say, that killed the buzz of the party up there pretty quick. You know, went from being a happy party scene up the street there to basically being an angry mob. Now, don't get it wrong, it wasn't the socialites up there who suddenly became an angry mob. I'm not saying that. It's not like they dropped their wine glasses and suddenly sprung into action or something. They basically ran off. But by doing that, they spread word throughout the city, and different people started showing up in droves who wanted some sort of justice for this. So you can imagine a couple hours later, the tone up there is very different. Okay, there's this giant angry mob surrounding the house. It was like a Frankenstein movie. You know, the Lawleries would vanish back inside there. And what happened next is honestly not entirely clear. It's really weird. There's a lot of accounts that different people are written about what happened. They're all, you know, they don't really match up. It seems like a lot of people are lying about what they did that night. But basically, it looks like they started to move the house. The Lawleries decided probably the intent to kill them. And when they did that, the Lawleries decided to make their move. Because the carriage house were at the doors going to the courtyard. The carriage house. The doors are there burst open suddenly, and a carriage walking down to the street. And that carriage contained Louis, Delphine, and their two daughters that night. And they drove out that way. So it's like punch. Now, the crowd that night, they literally destroyed us, chasing them down this road here on foot. But eventually they escaped. And they actually escaped on from the crowd that night. They escaped off the page of history. Or that they're gone, more or less, and we don't really know what happened. And the last thing that there's a shred of evidence for it. They probably left from here and went north to New York. There's a little bit of evidence for that, but past that it gets very, very hazy. The most common story, the one I like myself, says that they fled to Europe. And I like that version myself because it says that eventually Delphine Lawlery was killed violently during a hunting accident in France. They say she got trampled to death by a wild boar, which, you know, kind of has a sense of justice to it. But other people say, no, that sounds too poetic. You know, it sounds like she faked her death maybe. Or some people think she fled to the Caribbean. That's plausible. Other people I've heard out here say she lived out in the swamps under an assumed identity. She was like polymorphic and cat over here. And, you know, there's a lot of stories, but we don't really know. And the really wild thing about all that is that that night they got away, not only, you know, Louis and Delphine got away, but they got away with their two daughters. Which means that to this day, you know, anybody you know, even you and I can still be related to this family over here and not even know about it. So it's very weird. You know, if you have any weird holes in your family tree, maybe leave that stone unturned. But anyway, that's more or less the end of their family story over here. You know, so it's crazy. Now I will say, on you know, the reason we talk about this place on the Ghost Tour, and the reason that over the years this place has maintained the reputation, like I was talking about, as being the most haunted building in town, is really everything that's happened in the aftermath of what I just described. And to put it in a nutshell over here, what's happened over the years is that this place, like I said, ever since the Lawleries left, that same night, this place has been, you know, considered the most haunted place in town. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, the big reason is the history of what happened here. But another big factor in it is that it's been owned. The house has been owned by so many different people over the years. Okay, it's been a house over there many, many different times. It's been an apartment building a bunch. Also, it's been like a bar and a furniture store for a little while. None of that stuff ever goes well. Okay, the story is always more or less the same. You know, a few months into it, whoever buys the place starts to report ghost stories about it. You know, they'll say over the years there's a lot of stories, but the most sort of consistent ones between the owners tend to have to do with things like the spirits of African slaves roaming the hallways of the building at night. A lot of the owners have reported hearing all kinds of different sounds coming from the attic area, banging sounds and screams and stuff like that. There's really no end to the ghost stories over there, but to be honest, it gets kind of one layer weirder over here. You know, there's pretty much every building around here has some kind of ghost story about it, but
Pretty much
not every
ghost
story.
Not every building around here is considered
Ghost of
cursed
the
by most people in the
Steelers.
city. And this place is. And now, to be honest, I'm not one who really goes in for curses too much. But I've looked into this place extensively, and I think it's actually cursed. It's really weird, especially if you look at like the financial end of the history of this place. It's really bizarre. The same thing keeps happening there over and over the years. You know, basically, generally what will happen is a wealthy person will buy the house, they'll end up owning it for on average about 2 years. They'll spend a lot of money trying to renovate it, and eventually those renovations will go too far. They'll end up going bankrupt, and many times that's not the end of it over there. You know, the bankruptcy will slide into like divorce and suicide and all that kind of stuff. It's really kind of a creepy litany of negative events coming out of the building ever since the law already left. It's really weird. Now, I will say though, on a lighter note, somewhat lighter, about 20 years ago roughly, the house was purchased by the actor Nicolas Cage, and yeah, that was his house for 2 years. He basically fell into the exact same lollery template I was describing before. You know, he owned it for a couple of years. He went bankrupt over there. That was during like the Ghost Rider era of his career. You might remember him poorly for a while. And nowadays, anyway, it's owned. He lost it. Now it's owned by this private owner in Texas. And the current guy, he's still very interesting. First of all, he's owned it for like 8 years, which is extremely long for an owner to have it. But I think the reason for his success is he doesn't use the place. He's a very wealthy natural gas investor from Texas, and I'm told he has a bunch of big houses like this all throughout the U.S. that he owns. He doesn't really use this one though. I'd say 90% of the time around here, there's nobody in there. It's empty. Only folks who really go in there on a regular basis these days are the caretakers. You know, people's job it is to go in there and water the plants and all that stuff. Who knows? So before this group gets here, tell you guys, we're going to go around the corner over here. We've got a couple more things to talk about, but we're going to hit one more haunted hotel. We're going to see a place that was used as a hospital during the American Civil War.